So, as Kendra said, I'm Shanaz. I have been teaching at MSU for about 3 years, but I've really been here since 2009. So I was a grad student here, then a postdoc, and then I decided might as well just stay here forever. So now I teach here as well. So I'm going to talk to you today about using assessment or exam corrections, which is a small assignment that I've started doing in class that's really had this transformative power. It's just changed the classroom for me, and I hope it might do something similar for y'all. Really, this talk should be me and Cassie Dresser-Briggs. She is another colleague of mine at Lyman Briggs, but this is her heavy teaching day, so she couldn't make it. But I do want to point out that everything that I say is the two of us. We work very closely together, and we've designed a lot of these assignments together. So why did I even think of doing this type of assignment? It really came about when one day I was grading a couple of hundred exams, and I asked myself, do students ever look at their exam beyond looking at that grade and then dumping it in the corner, never seeing it again? I also wanted to kind of change the conversations that I would have in that office hour just after I graded the exam. So I wanted to kind of reshape those, can I get 0.5, 10, 5 points back, and transform it to a why did I make this mistake? Am I making the types of mistakes that fit into a certain pattern? And if so, how could I avoid that? So that's where this came from. And so I did what any good scientist would do. I went back and looked at the scientific literature. I was sure it's not just me, right? Everybody must go through this. And everybody, in fact, does kind of go through this. So just one quick example, they interviewed about 500 engineering students, asking them, you get your graded exam back, what's the next step? Only about 20% of them ever look at the exam again. And out of that 20%, I think it was 90% that said only if the future exams were cumulative, right? The other thing that I looked at is, what can I do to change this I want to get these points back, I want a short-term gain, and look at how to make students kind of value their metacognition and value their exams as really learning opportunities. And as I was reading through the literature, I came across this really quite large body of literature on exam wrappers, which are tools that people have used before to develop and build metacognitive skills in students. So what are exam wrappers? Just a very brief introduction. They were first introduced by Marcia Lovett at Carnegie Mellon. They are generally assignments that ask students to reflect on their graded exams or quizzes. And it's generally just down to 3 things, right? How did you prepare for the exam? So what learning strategies did you use? What types of mistakes did you make? And then how would you change your learning strategy for future exams? So it's things that we want students to be doing, and that as a naive new instructor, I assumed that they would be doing, but that they're not really doing. I also kind of fell deeper down the rabbit hole of this whole exam wrapper literature, and I came across exam and quiz corrections. And so corrections assignments, in addition to that general metacognitive assignment, also allows students to correct their specific mistakes. There's also generally an additional component, so it's more to generalize that assignment. So you not only correct that specific mistake, but you might be asked to identify similar problems or similar questions from classwork. You might be asked to explain why you made that type of mistake. So that's what an exam correction is. And essentially what this allows you to do, and I totally just stole this quote from that paper right there, but I really, really love what it says, right? It's getting students to move from viewing exams as assessments of learning to assessments as learning. Use those exams to learn, to correct those misconceptions. So do they work? Why did I decide to go ahead with it? And I'm going to be completely honest, the evidence is kind of mixed, meh. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Here's just kind of a summary of the types of gains that these assignments have been shown to give. So they've been shown to increase rates of test pickup, which students don't even come and pick up their exams. That's shocking to me. What? Also, it increases student perception of fairness of grading because they're spending time with that assignment. They're looking at the rubric and they're seeing how they could have written a different answer. It also changes student ratings of study strategies. So when you ask them, what do you think was the most useful to study for the exam, that rating changes over time because they're developing their metacognition. And in a few studies, and I would say this is one of those maybe it does kind of things, it shows a small increase in concept mastery, so in actually concept learning gains. What is also pretty consistent across the literature is that there's a dose response. So the more courses that you assign these assessment corrections in, the stronger the effect is, because it's just repetition. Intuitively, that makes sense to me. And also, there is a different effect on different types of students. So there's a couple of studies comparing students with different ranges of SAT scores or GPAs if they're not freshmen. And often what they show is that the highest effect is in those mid-range students. So probably the lower range students, the hypothesis is we might not be reaching them. They might need even more structure. And students who are in the higher percentiles might already have those skills developed. So there's not that much gain. All right. So this is just one example. It's from the original Lovett paper. And you'll see that I just want you to look right here, but over time, as they're rating those study strategies, memorizing facts and rereading the notes is just becoming less useful. They're recognizing that that's not as useful as actually connecting ideas, reviewing solution sets, solving new problems, all things that I want my students to get out of any kind of assignment. The problem with a lot of these studies is that they're one study. The sample size is generally quite small. There's often no control and no statistical analysis to test for effect size or significance. There's also very different modes of implementation. So when you give the assignment, the type of assignment, it's just everything's different and then lumped under exam corrections or exam wrappers, right? Also, everybody has a different measure of success. So if you only increase rates of test pickup, is that success to you, right? Everybody has a different measure. The one study in 2016 that did actually have a control group and also did some statistical analysis showed no effect on performance or metacognitive abilities. So there was no difference between the control and the treatment. They showed an increase in performance and metacognition over the semester, regardless of whether they did this or not. The one caveat to that is they do mention that they did several activities to target metacognitive abilities in addition to this, and the control group had all those activities. So is that really a fair comparison? I'm going to leave that up to you. So they had 96 students. They had different groups which had different treatments. So it was a different student body that was getting either the control or the assessment correction. Also, I think one other caveat to that study is that in their specific courses, the final exam was not even necessary. So you could just drop that exam. So that takes away a lot of the incentive from students to keep going and keep learning. So do they work? They kind of work sometimes. This is the question of a subtle project that Cassie, my colleague at Briggs, and I are running right now in our classrooms. So the three of us are working on this. Cassie and I are both instructors at Lyman Briggs College, and Sungwon is a mathematics graduate student who is currently a Soto fellow at Lyman Briggs, and he's working with us to collect this data and do the assessment. So we're going to compare really 3 treatments, no corrections, working on those exam corrections as an individual, and then group correction, so working with it as a group. We also want every student to get all the treatments. So they're going to get that over 3 mid-semester exams in a randomized order. We're going to compare for concept mastery, metacognitive ability, and student beliefs about learning. And we're also going to look at those different types of students, so differing ranges of incoming GPAs. This is ongoing. We have no data collected yet, so I cannot tell you the results. But I'd be happy to chat with you after the talk, or if you have any ideas for us. We haven't implemented it yet, so ideas, come to us. All right. So what does an assessment correction really look like? I'm going to give you 3 examples, 2 from prior literature and 1 that we've used in class. So that's one assignment. Essentially, it's just an email or a paragraph in the syllabus that's telling them to correct all of their mistakes and explain in a few words why they made the mistake that they did. And it's just kind of fitting into the margins of the exam. So it's pretty informal. The other correction right here is a little bit more formal. So they're diagnosing the mistake and then generalizing the mistake. So generally, it's a why did you make that mistake? What was the mistake? And then the generalization phase is find another problem that's similar in class, right? So these are 2 examples that they've used. Both these courses graded their assignments for completion. So if you submitted something that looked kind of reasonable, you got those allotted number of points back. Our assignment correction is a little bit more formal. It has a few more components to it. So we start off the assignment by explaining to the students why this is useful. We're telling them that this is an opportunity to learn these concepts because you will need them on that cumulative final exam. You will also need them in your upper level courses. We're also telling them that they're an opportunity to develop those written communication skills and then to reflect on the patterns of mistakes that you're making. We have this written as the introduction to the assignment. We also spend a lot of time talking about this in class to kind of get students to buy into the fact that these assignments do work and that they're useful. The next paragraph tells them why they should spend time on that. So it's a point incentive, which is important. It's always important. And we're also telling them that these corrections will be graded for quality, completeness, and correctness. So just submitting something will not, in fact, get you the points. You have to put some effort in, spend time on this. We tell them when they'll get the exam, when the corrections are due, and then we tell them what exactly is expected. So what we're asking students to do is to write the question number that they missed points on, the number of points that they missed. We're also asking them to categorize why they made this mistake. And this actual component has been quite useful to me because what I often find is the category that the student picks is not the category that I would pick. There's just such a misalignment there. So as a part of our study, I think we're going to collect that data as well, and that comparison might be useful. They provide the correct answer, so they're correcting their mistake. They're also writing out the specific learning objective associated with that question. We give them learning objectives at the start of every class, and in general, for the first exam, what I see is that is just a slide to flip over and move before we actually start reading the slides. And I want to get them away from that. I want to get them to actually value those objectives. And then finally, they're linking the concept being tested to 2 other concepts in class. And that's in a very simple format. It could be a small concept map, box and arrow model, and that is the end of what's expected. Students who get 1 question wrong have to correct only that 1 question. Students who get 10 have to correct all 10. And the assignment is still worth 5 points. We assess it. So far, we've assessed only the correct answer. We just kind of skim over these other components. And we talk to them if they come into office hours. So if everything's perfect, there's absolutely no mistake, they get 5 out of 5 points. The way I pitch it to them is this is an additional opportunity. It is not It is not a right, it's a privilege. So you have to do a really good job. So if there's even one mistake on there, you're down to a 2.5 because it needs to be perfect this time. And then if there's kind of a subpar assignment, not enough effort in there, then that's a 0, even if you submitted something. So that's the way we've done it so far. And students have responded pretty well to it. I was a little bit worried when I did that kind of sliding scale that I would get a lot of pushback, but I haven't so far. So it's been pretty good. This is one example. This was the first draft, the first time I ever did exam corrections. So I decided to keep these components and that linking concepts. This is one of the short answers. I had paragraphs talking about that, which is why we moved to the concept map box and arrow model, because I don't have time to look at that. But that's essentially one example of what a correction for one question would look like. So what should you consider when you're designing an exam correction for your class? Really, I thought about 3 things. There's probably a lot more that you could think about. But essentially, I would boil it down to what is your objective? If you had to pick 2 things that are really important to you, 2 skills that are really important to you, what would those be? How much time do you want to invest? The more time you have, the more elaborate you can make it. And then how do you keep it relevant and repeatable and flexible? So relevant for the students, you want them to want to invest their time in it. Repeatable and flexible, you do not want to write an exam corrections assignment for every exam every single time. So you want to be able to reuse that. The neat thing about these types of assignments is that they're so customizable, right? You get to reinforce whatever your objectives are. So what I want you to do is kind of think about if you had to pick 2 really specific skills, what would they be? So for us, they were to use the learning objectives not only as a guide to studying, but when you're seeing that question as an exam, you should be thinking of what objective does that question test. So that's one thing that I wanted students to start practicing. And the other thing was making connections and kind of linking concepts, and then communicating those links in writing. So what I want you all to do now is maybe take 10 minutes-ish to work on this individually, and then talk to a neighbor. What would those 2 specific skills look like for you? What's important for your classroom? Right? So we'll take 10 minutes, and then we'll discuss.
So our question was, do you have learning objectives that you put up before the class, before every lecture or every unit, and then they're linking back to those? Yes. Or are you doing the whole learning outcomes for like the whole class? It might be.
We have topics, unit-specific learning objectives that they're linking back to.
So I noticed for part B, I mean, that involves a lot of synthetic thinking. And for me, it seems like you really not only have to practice that, but do you have any suggestions on how to really get students to that point where rather than trying to just reiterate, the facts associated with it
Yeah, absolutely. So what I do in class as a regular practice is linking concepts or making those box and arrow models. That's not something new for them. It's what we do pretty much every class. We do it through every unit, and at the end of every unit, they build their own concept maps. So through the semester, the concept map essentially gets bigger and bigger and bigger because you're adding more things to it. So essentially, if they've done that concept map and they've done a really good job of that, this is nothing for them because they've done it already multiple times. So it's not as just an add-on to it. It's a part of what we're already doing in class. Yeah. Did anybody have any other challenges or thoughts that they would want to share?
So I'm wondering, I don't know how many students you have in your class right now, but I have 150 in mine, and I don't have a TA. So if I were to have to grade, let's just say, if I had them rewrite every single question that they missed, for some that would be easy, for others that would be much more difficult. I'm curious about the time commitment.
That's perfect, because that's where we're headed. All right, So how much time do you want to invest? I invest a lot of time in this assignment because this is something that works for me. I recognize that it's not something that everybody wants to spend half of their semester on. So you could customize it, right? You could assess them just for completion. So just the fact that they are doing some kind of metacognitive practice, you could do that, because that's what pretty much most of the prior literature is assessed for completion. Nobody grades it for accuracy. It's very, very rare. So that's one thing you could do. You submit something, it looks kind of fine, you get the points back. The other thing that you could do, and we've done this in the past, is limit the number of answers graded. So I will grade at random any 2 answers, and you don't get to complain because, again, this is a privilege. And then if those 2 that I graded were wrong, well, it's, sucks to be you, I guess. And then you can limit the number of answers that they get to correct. That is also something we've tried. So you get to correct up to 5 points worth, and then you're only grading that. So there's a bunch of different ways that you could customize these assignments. Also, you could use D2L rubrics or CrowdMark to grade your stuff. Who's used CrowdMark? I know Rachel has. You have. Y'all want to talk about your experiences with CrowdMark just a little bit? It's an online grading platform. I'll take you through it just a little bit first, and I haven't personally used it in a class. I've just played around with it, so I think people who've used it would be better resources. Essentially, it's a new online grading platform that MSU subscribes to. So if you work at MSU, you get a free subscription. You can sign up. You get to set up an assignment, so you give it a name. You tell them whether it's administered or assigned. So administered meaning you'll administer it in class and then scan this stuff. Assigned meaning the students will scan their assignments and put them up. It has this beta function where it actually recognizes and matches to the APIT number, so it automatically matches the exams, but I've heard that rarely works, so don't trust that. All right, you then scan in a PDF version of your exam. So that's what the scanned version looks like. It puts a little barcode up there, and that barcode allows the software to recognize the page number and the specific APIT associated with that exam. So it knows what page for what student every exam is. You then get to set up the number of points for every question or sub-question. When you have given your exam, you scan those exams. It doesn't matter what order you scan the pages in if they get mixed up, as long as you don't want to return them, because it will automatically be able to recognize it using the barcode. And then there's a bunch of ways you could grade it. So one way that I did here, it's not very clear, but you see check marks. Every check mark was a point. Essentially, I just put check, 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 and then I just count and put that in. So that's one way. The other way is to make a detailed rubric. This is something that I do anyway. It takes a little bit of time to set up. So essentially, I put in various comments. So is the DNA in G1 phase, which is what I've asked them to draw. And that comment is associated with a score of 2 points. Is the locus labeled a score of 2 points? So you've established this library, and all when you're grading the exam is dragging and dropping, and it's automatically calculating that score for you. So it'll just automatically do a 2 plus 2 plus 2, and so on. So if you're grading multiple exams, and you do want to have at least a small short answer component, instead of writing feedback or comments on every exam, which is what I've done so far, this seems so much better than that. It also, both for the student, so this is an email that I got because I was the student, but it gives the student and the professor automatic analytics for the exam, page number, and questions. So mean, median, standard deviation, all of that stuff already does that for you. And the student gets to see either just their score or the score with the feedback. So you can control that. All right, you all want to talk about your experiences?
So all of that is true. So we use this in our chemistry class in Lyman Briggs. So all 5 lecture sections are currently using this system. You can toggle on and off the data that goes back to students in terms of if they get the average by question, because sometimes you don't want to release that for some reasons, or you want to manage how you release that information to students. One way we've used this to do exam feedback is we give students their hard copy exam with no comments on it after we've graded it. Then we use a mail merge and the information from CrowdMark to give students their score on individual questions. During a recitation section, they spend time doing kind of like the corrections, where you get together in groups and each group is responsible to reassemble a good answer for a question. And then they do the metacognitive reflection on what went wrong for your particular questions. Do you see any themes to that? And then after they've done that thing in recitation, then we can email them their individual feedback and comments with all the little check marks and comment boxes. So they do get the detailed feedback, but they have to do the metacognitive work first. And we actually have a built-in quiz that happens after that recitation. So there's something that they were already going to have to do anyway, but now they've spent the time reassembling answers and get assessed on the quiz after they've done the work in recitation. So.
Do you want to?
I'm in the College of Engineering. I teach in chemical engineering, and I was just going to start using this for our quizzes, which are kind of smaller assessments, but now we use it for everything. One of the best things is that you can grade from anywhere. So if you're traveling, you don't have to carry papers around. You just have to be able to log in to the internet. If you use a tablet, you can also include handwritten comments. You know, if there's something that's not on a rubric, and you can also have positive and negative rubrics either way. You can have a team of graders grading in parallel. So I have my TA grading one of the problems while I'm grading the other, and we don't have to wait either for the papers to be passed along or, disassemble them and then put them back together. And then kind of in a, unfortunately, negative light is that it prevents academic dishonesty of returning papers. Well, that's actually a real good positive thing. You don't have to spend 10 minutes returning papers when you have 150 students in your class because you send them back the scanned, corrected papers. And then in kind of that negative light is we have the scanned original, so they can't ever add something and say, well, you didn't see this, or it was on the back of the page and you just never checked it. So it prevents that. And I'm teaching sophomore level class, and they love it. I was a little bit suspicious, but the students really love this electronic transfer of they upload and they get it back. And so I haven't used it in the context of what you're talking about, the metacognitive, but that's why I'm here listening. So anyway, this is a great tool, and I wasn't aware that MSU pays for it, because we just paid for it in the College of Engineering, and so maybe they're double dipping.
Maybe y'all. I'm gonna walk back and just say that somebody paid for it and we got access to it.
Yeah, I think it's in the works. Engineering was piloting, so that I think MSU will. Yeah. So it's hopefully going to be paid for.
Oh, all right. The other neat thing about this tool is you get to, if you want to go back and change the rubric, so you don't have to regrade all those exams, you just change the amount of points associated with the comment and it changes it on all the exams. Isn't that awesome?
How do you scan them in? I think I'll scan.
I've had an LA scan them in anyway, because just like Rachel said, when we do exam corrections, we don't want to give them all the feedback. So we physically scan them. You have to scan them.
That's the
Yeah.
funkiest part of it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the time that you save in all other aspects is totally
Yeah.
worth it.
Yep.
So I have a question about, so I teach genomics in CNS. I do a lot of writing assignments, but obviously the grading is difficult. Do you have any experience with peer grading or peer review with like students, giving feedback and so on?
Yeah, I have done a little bit of peer grading before for written assignments. We do it in lab because we have them write lab proposals. There is an actual peer grading tool, and I forget the name, but I will. Right. So you can have them use the training sets, right, kind of adjust, calibrate their grading, and then do that. So I have used peer grading before, but not for this type of assignment. All right, so just caveats: setting up takes time, scanning and matching takes time, and it might not be paid for. All right, so how do you minimize instructor time? We talked about that, but we also want to be mindful of student time, because if it takes a lot of time, they're not going to want to do it. And again, I think that's up to each class. Personally, I teach biology in a college where more than 90% of the students are biology majors. So I automatically have that advantage of they're coming in excited. So you want to judge for yourself how many requirements can or should you include, and then should the students be required to correct all the questions. I tend to go with a yes, because I want the students who need the most help to get the most help, but again, that's your own judgment to make. The way we have the assignment set up, just from speaking to students, it takes them between 1 and 3 hours to do this assignment. To me, that's not unreasonable. They haven't brought it up as unreasonable. When we offer this, it's an option. It's not mandatory for them. And I've had more than 95% of the students actually do this assignment and say that they find it valuable. So I guess that would vary with the classes. Just to give you a brief time frame, we give them 3 days to submit the corrections post when we hand out the graded assignments. And it takes me about 2 or 4 days to get it done. For a class of about 100 students, it normally takes me, I want to say, 4-ish hours to go through everything and grade it. That's about the time commitment that you're looking at if you set it up like I've set it up. So how do you keep it relevant, repeatable, and flexible? By relevance, I mean, how do you make students want to do this, put their effort into doing this? I think talking about why is a big one. It almost seems silly to put it up there, but you can get so caught up with just trying to get those concepts covered that you forget to do this. It's so important to tell them the purpose of the assignment and why we're having them do that. Also, adding a grade incentive. I've kind of thought about taking away that grade incentive and see how many would still continue doing that. So maybe only incentivizing the first or the second set of corrections. But then you see the literature out there and they're talking about these dose effects. And you have to realize that we're doing these corrections in one of their so many classes. That's why I keep the incentive going. Also, I think it's almost a must to make at least some of those exams cumulative. In my class, everything is cumulative. There is no single unit exam, but at least the final, I think that's a big incentive to correct those misconceptions now. Repeatability and flexibility, that's really an advantage to the way you design these assignments, is you could literally use the same assignment for every single exam. That's the way you want to write it. So you don't want to write it concept specific or unit specific. And I've done a retest before. This assignment is easier for me because I don't have to write a retest for the toughest questions or the most missed questions. You can also, stretching that a little bit further, use the same assignment across multiple courses. So when you're design it to address skills, not concepts. So what I want you to do is maybe work on designing your assessment correction. I think a couple of y'all, when y'all were designing your skills objectives, talked about how would you do this type of assignment for a written essay or a written paper. I think that's an interesting challenge if some of you want to work on that with me. So take about 10 minutes. If you had specific goals, do that. If you didn't, what assignment would you design not for an exam, but more for an essay-based written assignment? All right, so let's take 10 minutes and talk about that. All right, everybody, let's kind of come together again. Does anybody want to have any questions, any thoughts? What did y'all come up with?
So my question is, let's say I have a 100-point short answer exam. They had, let's say, 5 questions.
Yep.
And will they do this, if they scored a 70, would they do this for 5 additional points?
I think that depends on your class. Like I said, your incentive, the way you set this up, it has to be customized to your students. My students do it. Even if they've got their scores range from a 40 to a 90, and all of them are buying into it. I think it's partly the students that you're getting, and it's partly the way you pitch it to them. You can try to tell them that it's going to have long-term benefit and all of that stuff. How much that's going to work?
And there are other ways to go about it too. So I do exam corrections in my class, but they get a third of their points back for every question they get wrong. So a top student's only going to get a few points, whereas a student that did poorly is going to end up with a significant grade bump.
Yeah. So the many different grading schemes that I have used, you can get up to half your points back. You can get half your points back up to a maximum of 10. You just get this sliding scale of 5. I've played around with it a lot, and I'm not quite sure that this is the sweet spot. This is just what I've hit right now. So
I know one thing for me that this exercise made me do is recognize that I need to really improve on my learning objectives. It seems like I have a lot of work to do to create the alignment that would be necessary to execute this.
which is a good thing, right? We all have goals. Yeah. All right. Anybody else want to share what they?
I think for me, it's also made me think more about the summative assessments going into it. Like, rather than maybe on the back end of stuff, could some of this be used more on the front end before that heavyweight exam comes up to get them to think about something in a smaller scale, and then it has maybe a bigger impact going into the bigger thing? So, like you had mentioned that your students are really used to concept maps the whole way through. So my students aren't. I sometimes toss it in here and there, but are there certain things I could do more regularly? Because I struggle with, if I look at these things, my students in some of the classes, they're just not going to be motivated to go deep, right? They're going to be like, I just ticked all the boxes, because that's what I do. I'm a box ticker. They're not a box filler, and I want them to fill the box with something. Yeah. Or stack the box on something, or connect the box, or put wheels on it. Yeah, so I need to go further. But thinking about it earlier might maybe help incentivize my students more if they see a bigger payoff for it.
So we have done homework and quiz corrections also before exam corrections. Again, you could apply it to whatever you feel. But, yeah.
One thing that I'm wondering and thinking about for your study is measuring or asking students about their exam preparation something that's worth measuring, because I really wonder if in doing the wrapping that you would see differences in quantity or quality of what students are putting in beforehand, and if those are some of the reasons that the dose effects are happening, and if there's a way to kind of measure what that is, that could be really potentially cool.
Yeah, we'll definitely be doing the student belief survey as well, so that will definitely be included in that. That's definitely on our radar to do. All right, so we're kind of done this bit, so we'll just move on. So as I kind of finish up here, my PI when I was in grad school always taught me to do this thing that I really like, and he said, don't just end the talk with saying, all right, now I'm done. Pose questions to the audience so you get them to ask questions back. So that's what I'm going to do. I want to kind of get your idea, how do we measure effectiveness? What would make it worth it for you to put in this effort, right? For me, student feedback is good, but I also want to see some measure of effectiveness. What I have now, right now for you is just this. It's just a very qualitative form of feedback. It's from the end of semester surveys, right? Students value these assignments. They value the opportunity to correct those misconceptions. As for effectiveness, we're still testing that, but what would make it worth it for you? What measure moving up would kind of push that scale over to where you do that? On the other side of things, what might prevent you from doing this? if it's time, let's come up with a way to make it shorter. What are your obstacles, and as a group, can we come up with a way to overcome those? Let's start with what would make it worth it for you. Would you want to specifically see learning gains? Would metacognitive gains be enough? Would just student attitude be enough? I see a little bit less of a yes.
Can I say all of that would be, any of that would be great. One thing that I wondered is, I loved how in the beginning you talked about moving the conversation from how do I earn back points to how do I learn more material or a concept or whatever. And I wonder with your research, it would be sort of interesting if you just had a little tally sheet next to the door and every student that came into the office, you tally whether they talked about points or not, right? And it would be really interesting to see in the randomized, like the students who didn't get the exam correction first, but then got it later, like the shift. And if there is a shift, like to me, that would be phenomenal. It puts me in such a bad mood when every conversation is about points.
I'm here from the College of Ed, and one of the things that's really interesting and important to me in this conversation is what messages are we sending to students about assessment and the time it takes for learning and making corrections and stuff like that. So I think I'm struggling with the answer of what would make it worth it. It's worth it. It's just those other pieces and how does it get structured. But I think this pushes against our historic view of assessment to a point where, if you're trying to get your entire department on board with these types of changes, that may not be worth it. So anyway, but I think I'm hoping that these are the types of ways of thinking about assessment that we can all be moving toward.
Rachel left, but I'm going to initiate that conversation in Briggs. We'll see how it goes. Let's see if we can get 1 year of assessment corrections.
I have heard, and I don't know if this is true, from education, I've heard in the high schools that they're now doing this. So I think students incoming will expect this. And I don't know how they're doing it in the high schools, but I know within this Tri-County area, this is ongoing. It's just like we didn't used to post reminders about quizzes and exams. I mean, you better look at the syllabus, put it in your planner. Well, now students come to me and go, you didn't remind me we had an exam. And I said, well, it is posted on D2L, you have a syllabus. No, I need a reminder sent to me. And I said, well, and I know you can set that up in D2L to do it. So I'm like old school, and I said, when you graduate, you're not going to get reminders about meetings. You need to start upgrading these skills. But I know a lot of instructors say, I'll just send them reminders because I don't want to deal with the students complaining. So we may start getting this, like, when do I get to correct my exam? And if you hadn't been sitting here, you'd look at them and go, what? So, and when I first heard you were doing this, I'm like, what is this about? And Kelly Millenbaugh was explaining to me how their students are correcting their exams. And I said, well, I need to go because I don't get it. So now I get it. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
So one of the things that we've done to kind of avoid those conversations, and it's just, I think think of it as like well-timed introduction. So this is not in the syllabus. It's given to them after their first graded assignment as, here's this cool thing that we're doing for you. Look at that, but it was planned all along. And that takes away some of that, but I deserve this because it's in the syllabus.
So I can tell you as a former high school teacher before this world that we do this a lot. But that brought up another thing with us. I started doing this as a relatively young teacher, and I got a lot of flack from students and from parents about how much I was pushing their kid and how much work I was giving them. And it took some time for the culture of the school to understand that what I was doing was really beneficial to them. And so that brought up a conversation about how much flack are we going to get when complaints start rolling downhill or uphill about what we are teaching and what we are doing to students and things of that nature, and kind of how that's going to impact us from our supervisors looking at us saying, why are you bringing so much trouble to my desk?
But it's optional, right?
Yeah.
You opt into it. So if you think it's too much trouble, opt out. So I guess that would be my answer to them, is it's optional.
Going back to that first question on effectiveness and making it worth it, I think for me, evidence that it helps students that are particularly struggling or that we're not reaching by other methods would be a really good one, right? Because there are some students that can learn under the most abysmal circumstances, and then there's other students that really need to learn how to become learners. And if this is a good tool for them, I'd love to see that, and that would really help a lot.
To be fair, most of the literature shows that it doesn't help those students
exactly.
that much. Could that be, again, a dose-specific thing that they just haven't seen it enough? It could be. I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah, the studies you presented, there was only one that was really even sort of
looking
balanced.
at that.
So maybe what you're doing now in that much more systematic way will give us some new info.
So for your students who are, let's say, the ones who aren't scoring very well and do this, when you're reading their first and second shots at this, do you find that they get significantly better at answering the questions? Do you think that the levels come up? I mean, even if you're talking about the mid-range, like just your own personal experience, what kind of...
It's all over the place. It depends on how much effort they've put into the assignment. As the semester goes on, it gets a lot better because they see that I'm taking it seriously. I think that's something that, Bob, you mentioned as well, right? As they do it, they see that it works, and then they put more effort into it. Some of the students, I'm going to be honest, some never do. They just don't buy into this kind of assignment. And I don't fully understand why they're still submitting something because it's optional if they're not going to put any effort into it, but they do. So
it's almost worse than, yeah.
So in my experience, one thing that I'm already thinking about is how do you engage students because it's this attitude of being engaged, wanting to learn and things like that. And I find that a lot of the time, students are already predetermined. They already have when they start the class, they already have in their mind the kind of grade that they're going to get. It's like, I'm a C student. And so they say, I'm going to do just what it takes to get that grade. And then the A students, I'll do whatever it takes to get A's and so on. And I think it's very difficult to break that. Is say, how do you take a student and say it's not about reaching a C or a B or whatever you're comfortable with, but it's about self-growth. It's like, how good can you be? And it's difficult because we have to give a grade at the end, and so that's what they see at the end. It's a product of everything they've done is summarized on the syllabus on their grade sheets. And that's the only thing that goes out of college with them. And then the next step for them is often taking another test, which is like the MCAT, the GRE, or whatever. So it's another score that kind of make everything that they know kind of very abstract. And so breaking away from that and saying, what is it that you want to learn? What is it that you want to be? And then how can we, work at that, regardless of the grade you're going to get. But distracting students from the grades is extremely difficult. And like you said, you can, if you don't give points to anything, it doesn't matter how you explain how important it is for the next step of their life, they're just going to ignore it. If you give them a couple of points, they'll do anything, spend hours on mindless tasks just to get a couple of extra points. I think this is this is a difficult question to address because it's kind of fundamental to the way this system is set up. But everything that we do, all the assignments and all of that, is always going to be reduced to that at some point. Is that, what is it worth to me? And they just have kind of this. I mean, most of the conversation that I have with my students, they come to me and it's like, I am an A student. I don't deserve a B. I was like, you're not the judge of that. I am, but
I guess I completely see where you're coming from. I think it is possible for some students to reshape those conversations over the semester. Now, I'm not going to say that I have ever convinced a student that grades don't matter. Because let's face it, in this system, they do, right? They just do. That's how they're judged. If you're telling students grades don't matter, they're going to come back to you and say, but I want to get into med school, grad school, vet school, whatever. And they do matter, so they do matter. I think what we can get them to do, and what this assignment is trying to get them to do, is to see that wanting the grade doesn't get you the grade, right? Doing these kinds of things gets you the grade. Working on your learning gets you the grade. And I have seen students' attitudes or perceptions shift in that direction. Is I still value my grade, but how I'm going to get that grade is by doing all these things and being a better learner. So I think that is possible. But what do I know? I've been teaching like 4 years.
Just one anecdote I'd like to share. So I've been doing test corrections for many years, and I let the students earn back up to 1/3 of their missed points, which originally when I was doing this, I'm like, oh, this is probably too generous. But having done it for a lot of years, the students that do it, and I grade for correctness, most of them do not do it correct and don't get all the points back. But those that do it, they're really earning these points. This is really valuable time spent reflecting on their learning, and it can make a difference. Here's a question I'd like to pose. So a problem I know about in mathematics, my discipline, is that there's this discrepancy between gender. So females, I've seen studies, may get, say, an A- or a B+, and convince, for that reason alone maybe, or other reasons, that they are not suited to the study of, say, mathematics, and so leave the discipline. Whereas a male student can get the same score or worse and persist for maybe the wrong reasons, but that's what happens. I wonder if setting up opportunities like this to earn, not give, earn points back allows maybe some of these students to, I don't know, build the confidence to succeed. I don't know.
All right, are there any more questions? All right, thank you for coming in.